Let's go to St. Louis University Law School. The dean there, Michael Wolff, who was involved in this as special counsel to then Governor Carnahan. We sat down with him this week as well for his perspective.
I was chief counsel for Governor Carnahan in the first couple of years of his administration, and then I came back to St. Louis U to be teaching, and I was special counsel and assigned specifically to figure out, with a number of other players, what to do both with respect to the state government and also the legislature, because the school district of Kansas City and St. Louis were under federal court desegregation orders, and it was pretty clear from the precedents that were occurring in the United States Supreme Court and in the U.S. Court of Appeals here that the courts were going to get out of the desegregation business at some point. So we needed to figure out, well, how do we transition to a school district that's not operating under federal court order? There were a number of funding mechanisms, because at that time the amount of state aid that a district could get was based in part on its property tax rate. And so there were two things that the legislature did with that. One is that they created an overlay district on top of the St. Louis School District, because that would allow them to have an additional $2.75 of assessed valuation on their property tax rate, and therefore draw down more aid under the school aid formula. And then the second thing that they did to draw down more state aid was the legislature, knowing that the district voters in the city would probably not approve a property tax increase, authorized the city district to put on the ballot a sales tax proposition, which they did in March of 1999 to get some additional money. The legislation provided that that sales tax money would be converted to an equivalent amount of property tax so that more money would be available under the formula. And then the other piece that's significant for this controversy, is that the same bill, Senate Bill 781, provided for the establishment of charter schools. Now, admittedly, in 1999, when the case was settled, there were no charter schools. They had just been authorized. In fact, I think there was a great deal of resistance by the city school board to anybody starting a charter school. So it took a few years for them to get up and running in any kind of meaningful sense in St. Louis. But the funding mechanism was in the 1998 bill, and that is this charter school for each child would get the state aid for that kid, plus the amount of local property and sales tax effort. So the local taxing effort would be built into that. And the mechanism for doing that was to have the state pay the full per pupil amount, both state aid and local effort, to the charter school directly. And then the amount of the local effort that the state had paid would be deducted from the school district's state aid entitlement. So it was a way of funding charter schools that avoided having to have them wait while the city school district processed or figured out whether or not they were going to pay or whatever. So that was all done by the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. In 2005, the legislature rewrote the funding formula. So instead of having money be based on the amount of local tax effort, it was based upon what the legislature defined as adequacy. Adequacy was computed by taking a bunch of well-performing school districts, not the highest, not the lowest, but people that are doing a decent job of educating children, averaging the amount of money they were spending per pupil. And that became the legal definition of adequacy. In part, this is a problem that starts with the legislature being unwilling and unable to fund our public schools across the state adequately, adequacy in a real sense. And what it does is it leaves the local people to fight among themselves. So we get this fight between the St. Louis School District and the charter schools. The amount of public aid, both local tax and state aid, follows the kid. So if you have a school that's educating a kid, you should be entitled to the amount of money that is attributable for that child. So the simplest way to express it is the money follows the kid. When the kid goes to a charter school, the money follows the kid. When the kid goes to interdistrict transfer program, now they've negotiated different rates than they used to have, but still there's money that follows the kid to provide that child an education. I mean, I really have a great deal of empathy for both the city schools, the NAACP, the Liddell plaintiffs, and the charter schools, because they are all trying, I think, I do not question anybody's good faith. They are trying to educate the children of this city with what is not enough money to really, honest to God, meet the needs of those children. And that is something where the focus ought to be on the legislature, not on an inadequately funded adequacy formula that forces the local people to fight with one another. I guess the simplest thing I can say about public education is there's various pieces of it that look simple, but none of it is simple.